So this is the start of the second recorded lecture here in the spring of 2022, BI252, and I am Ed Zalisko. Now we're going to take a look at specific parts of the digestive system. So the first lecture was a broad overview of the digestive system, and now today we're going to look at only the mouth and the associated glands and teeth and other structures. So we'll end there. We'll end before we get into the pharynx. So we're starting out with just the mouth, and that's the second lecture. Mouth goes by several other names: oral cavity or buccal cavity. General functions of the mouth, you can probably think of many of these. So we'll see if you want to pause right here and see if you can come up with some functions. It's actually good for you to try to anticipate what some of these are before I go through them. So pause here and see if you can think of some of these. And now I'm going to go over, this is some of the functions. First of all, taking in food. So it's the place where food enters for the most part, right? It's hard to think of how else you get food inside of you, but it's possible that there's a feeding tube that would be inserted through maybe your nose and make their way down into your digestive tract. So almost always, this is how we take in food. Second, this is how we detect characteristics of what we are eating. We taste, we smell, and there are textures, of course, so don't miss the textures. The crunch of a potato chip, or a soggy old potato chip, or one that's been in the chip dip too long. So you dipped it in the sauce or a salsa or something like that, and you leave it too long on the chip. So those are old nachos, right? They've been served to you and you took a long time, and now you have these limp nachos. So there's also these textures. And boy, it's starting to make me hungry because it's about lunchtime, and I shouldn't be talking about things like that. Chewing and chemical digestion, of course, is beginning here. Our saliva does a little bit for us to get things going, in addition to lubricating, and we're going to talk about saliva. There are some enzymes that begin or initiate the chemical digestion process. And finally, the function that I'm using right now as I speak and as I articulate. So when you say the letter T, you put your tongue by your top teeth, tongue by the top teeth, and it makes that kind of popping sound associated with T's. Also respiration involved in controlling respiration or slowing respiration or blocking. And swallowing, for goodness sakes. Mouth is enclosed by your lips, the palate, so the secondary palate, both hard and soft, and your tongue and your cheeks. So we're going to talk about all of these as we go forward here. But before we do, let's have an oral exam. So here's figure 25-4, and let's have a little fun here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe a function, and then you're going to try to figure out or describe a characteristic of one of these parts of figure 25-4, and then you're going to see if you can guess which it is. And by the way, a little side note here, I've noticed that some of the figure references are to the 7th edition of the textbook and not the 8th. So please know if the exact figure is off a little bit, search around. You're probably going to find the exact same figure, maybe in a different location. I think that was maybe true for the first lecture. I'm trying to catch that wherever possible and use the 8th edition numbers as I catch this. But it's possible that some of the 7th edition numbers are making their way through. And we have a copy of the 7th edition of the Saladin textbook available in the zoology lab. So here we go. Let's have this oral exam just for fun. So I'm going to present this description, and then we'll go with the answer. So you can pause at any time and see if you can figure these out. I'm just going to go through these. I'm not going to read this to you. And now the answer. So look up the lingual frenulum and see if you can find out where that is on the diagram and how it's doing this function. Okay, that's where you're going to do this, and I'm just going to roll through these. And so pause anytime. And you can see then what is the structure, description, and then what's the answer, and find it on the diagram. Okay? By the way, underneath the lingual frenulum is a place where salivary, geez, not sweat, but where salivary secretions are coming out. And so there you can see salivary duct orifices, sublingual right down into here. And this is where, in some cases, under higher pressure, you can actually expel saliva rather forcefully. So if you've opened up your mouth and went to take a bite of something, maybe an orange or a lemon or a grapefruit, something sour, spit possibly shot out of your face. Now, at the very last slide on this lecture, the second recorded lecture, I'll explain the mechanism of that. What could happen that would forcefully cause saliva to shoot out of your mouth. But you got to hang on. It's at the very, very end. So here's the structure, description. And now find that structure on the diagram. Here's the description. Here's the answer. And find that on the diagram. And of course, you need to know these descriptions and these functions. And this is all recorded, so you can go back and pause anytime. So I hope you're running through these. I hope you're taking some notes, pausing where you need to, and looking these up. But the little quizzing part is one way that it can help you to learn these things. So this is the kind of note card approach I was telling you about, where you've got, and that you have the advice. Gosh, I've covered it in zoology and probably the first semester of human anatomy phys, and it's titled As You Begin. A hard copy of my study advice is available in the Zolab. And so, you know, a description like this and then an answer, these are really, really good ways to study. It tests your memory. It's called self-assessment. Okay. All right, now a little bit about the epithelium. In general, the epithelium that lines our mouth and most of the surfaces is stratified squamous, non-keratinized. But as you'll see, there are some places where we do have keratinized stratified squamous epithelium in our mouth, and that would be on the gums and some of the hard palate. The non-keratinized are in most of the other surfaces, including the tongue, which might be a little surprising to you. The tongue is not keratinized. Cheeks and lips. Why do we have them? This is one of those, again, where it's very useful for you to pause right now and give some thought to, yeah, why do we have cheeks and lips? And by the way, there are critters that don't have really good cheeks and really good lips. And one might be a dinosaur for you to think about. So think about T-Rex. And if you think about T-Rex, it doesn't have the kind of lips that you and I have, and it doesn't have the kind of cheeks that you and I have. So what is gained, what is going on in mammals like us that's not probably going on, for example, an alligator, just as well. If you want to think about a living reptile very much related to the dinosaurs, think about an alligator. So did you think today you were going to be considering alligator lips? Okay, well, alligators don't have much in the way of cheeks or lips. So what is it that mammals do that alligators don't do? And these are really important. So think about young alligators. Do young alligators latch onto mother alligator, onto a nipple on mother alligator, and get milk? No. Mammary glands are characteristic of mammals. Alligators don't have breasts. So one of the functions of lips is actually to form a tight seal around a nipple and be able to extract milk effectively. Another function, different, is cheeks. So cheeks in mammals, cheeks in us, are associated with chewing. Chewing. When you smash food between your teeth, if you think about this, that food then, when it gets mashed, goes out beyond the teeth. It squishes out, right? And half of it or so will squish in towards your tongue. That's good. But the other half, when it gets squished, could fall out of your head. Cheeks keep that food in your mouth when you are chewing. Cheeks keep food in your mouth when you're chewing. Isn't that interesting? Well, do alligators chew their food? No. They might bite off a piece, rip off a piece, but they swallow that whole. This whole idea of chewing, mastication is what it's called. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. That is something very unique to mammals. So, retaining the food, pushing between the teeth was related to the chewing part I just told you. Speech is part of it, our cheeks and our lips. So sometimes you put your lips together, right, to make an M or an N. Well, an M, not an N, right? An M, the letter P, right? Try to say the letter P and the letter M without using your lips. And of course, people, ventriloquists who try not to move their lips, have to find other ways around making those sounds. And this is the sucking or blowing actions that I was talking about for a nursing infant. Here's some of those good, fun pictures that allow us to focus in on some of these muscles associated with chewing and associated with our cheeks. And you learned these muscles in Human Anatomy Phys 1 if you took that course. The tongue. The tongue's in the mouth. It's in the oral cavity. And here we can look at some of the surface parts of the tongue. Really, really bulky, and we'll make that point here in a couple other pictures. Non-keratinized, as I said already, and of course its role in tasting and how taste is perceived was discussed in Human Anatomy Phys 1, so I'm not going to repeat it here. But look at the bulk of the tongue. Look at how deep this tongue is in your jaw. And so if you put your hand underneath your chin in the soft space, so between your mandibles, right, directly underneath your mouth. And then if you move your tongue a lot, boy, you can feel your tongue moving within your mouth because it's very deep. So what's tongue doing? Well, it's moving food around to position between your teeth. Of course, it's, we already said, it's sensing both the taste and texture of the food. And the tongue's used to clean the teeth. It'll help to clean your teeth out. Yeah. And maybe you can think of other functions of the tongue. Here are some pictures, different images from different angles, right? So you can tell this is sagittal, looking at a cadaver and someone's tongue highlighted here. Here's a sagittal section, so that's a lateral view right there. This is a sagittal section over here. See if you can remember what kind of section that is. And that's a frontal, or actually in this case, a frontal section of the face. So it's cutting parallel to the axis of the body, but in a front way. And isn't that massive? This is just quite kind of almost a spooky image, seeing the nasal cavities, the orbits for the eye. But look at the size of the tongue occupying this person's mouth. And then this is a ventral view, as if the person tilted their head up. And this is not the roof of the mouth, but this is actually the tongue seen from a ventral view. It's just a really large muscle occupying a huge part of the oral cavity. Well, the palate. The palate here is the roof of the mouth that I'm talking about. There's a palate in the roof of your mouth called the hard, which has a bony core, and a soft palate, which is soft. We'll look at these in just a second in another diagram. And these form the roof of the oral cavity and separates the oral cavity from the nasal cavity. So we can easily breathe while chewing food. Or having food in our mouth, we can breathe, right? So you could take a bite of apple and still breathe in. Don't know if you ever thought about that. Well, it turns out that this palate evolved in alligators as well. And so alligators can have a big chunk of a deer or a duck or something in their mouth, and they can still breathe easily. That's kind of neat. And if I happen to be in lab and you were curious, I could show you that long palate in an alligator that does what it does in us. Separates out the air passageway from the food passageway. So the hard bony palate has these palatine processes of both the maxilla and palatine bones, something that some of you might have missed on the bone exam because it's frequently missed. And then the soft palate is near the rear of your palate, and it does not have that bony core. Yeah, we're going to see this. So there's some skeletal muscle and also glandular tissue there. But in the soft palate, there's no bone. Here's the sagittal sections. This is figure 22-3, and I think it's this one right. Yeah, then maybe that one that's in your book. They're all showing the same thing, and this is a nice sagittal section of a cadaver. So let's go over here, actually in the upper right. Here's the hard palate, and then there's that extension, so there's a little bit of bony piece there, and an extension of the soft palate. And notice that the tip of the soft palate is the uvula. That's that little punching bag thing in the back of our throats that we were just looking at. Here again, you can see the huge tongue. We think of our tongue as this long and thin thing, but that's a shape change of the tongue as we project our tongue forward. But this palate is keeping separate the passageways for both food and for air. Now, one of the problems are that when you lean over to vomit, you might lean far enough that when food comes up your esophagus, it passes out your nose. Okay, so it would be better for food, I'm going to guess, for whatever's in your stomach and what you're vomiting to come out your mouth. But that requires that your head is more vertical. So I'm sort of teaching you how to vomit here. Keeping your head more vertical when you vomit then makes it less likely. It makes it less likely, because this is science, that the food's going to go out your mouth and not your nose. The problem is that's a bit of a projectile vomiting. And so to go into a toilet, you have to lean over. If you're outside, it's best to stay vertical while you're vomiting, although it's probably going to trickle down your chin, and now this is all gross, isn't it? So over here, we can see the actual human sagittal section. We can see the roof. You can hear Lucy whining behind me while I'm talking. Lucy, come on now, you're making too much noise. Vertebral column right here just for some orientation. Okay. The very back of the throat, pharyngeal regions, we'll talk about in the next lecture. And now here, pharyngeal regions are identified, so that's for a later lecture. This showing you some of the nasal cavity and that hard palate, and then followed by the soft palate at the tip. Here, really nice images that help to isolate and show you the hard palate and soft palate, the uvula, which is, as we said, the tip of the soft palate, even the tonsils over here on the side. Let's talk about teeth. Goodness, as I was growing up, unfortunately, really unfortunately, modern dental medicine had not hit Morton, Illinois, where I grew up, which is by Peoria. And our dentist there gave us very little advice about how to take care of our teeth. I don't remember any treatments of our teeth, and I regularly would have cavities, and all he'd do is fill them. So all sorts of problems that I had to have addressed, and it wasn't until I really became an adult in my 20s that I really started taking care of my teeth, and I'm living with a lifelong legacy of that. So lucky you, I hope all of you are brushing your teeth regularly, should be at least twice a day. Electronic toothbrushes that vibrate or hum, ultrasonic, I'm highly recommending. I'll tell you that when we, in my lab, wanted to look at teeth, salamander teeth, of course, under an electron microscope to clean the teeth, we would place them in a bath that used ultrasonic vibrations. And oh my gosh, guys, was that so effective at removing anything that was on the surface of the teeth. So I use such a toothbrush and I find it to be highly effective. There are other toothbrushes that are also highly effective. And so what I'm describing is just one. Teeth is part of the assignment in lab, something you have to know. And here we'll take a look at the two different sets of teeth. The baby teeth right at the top, maybe sometimes called milk teeth. And down here at the bottom, more of the permanent set that you might see or know. 20 deciduous teeth. Already, my grandson, baby Reed, little Reed Wolf is his name. Reed has already broken through and had two of his bottom teeth that came through, I think, in his 5th month of life. So now in his 6th month, he just turned 6 months old, he's got another tooth that looks like it's erupting. And in little babies, by the way, when these teeth erupt, it's an irritation of the gum, I mean the bones pushing through soft tissue. And as a response, kids like to chew on things. It provides, for whatever reason, a little bit of relief, so they chew a lot, put things in their mouth at that age. But they also have lots of saliva that are produced. So one of the things you'll notice in a newborn child, maybe about 4, 5, 6 months old, is that they may be drooling a lot. And that's associated with tooth eruption, teeth breaking through the gums. So erupting anywhere from 6 to 30 months is what the book said, but for our grandson, the cutest and happiest child ever to walk the face of the earth. And I'm a scientist, darn it, so I can measure these things. Reed Wolf, our grandson, fast and as speedy development as it is, he broke through in 5 months. In any case, it's those incisors, and that's exactly what I just told you. So what's interesting is between, as it says, well, pretty much from about the age of 6 to 25, you get this set of teeth, and then they're lost and replaced by adult teeth. And there are 32 adult. Now, some of us had our wisdom teeth, the third molar tooth right here. Some of us had that tooth removed if there were problems associated with it. Both of my children did not. And I talked to the dentist and said, do you think that's normal? And they said, no, sometimes they come through just fine. So I believe both of my children have their sets of wisdom teeth. There weren't any problems. And of course, 16 on the mandible and 16 on top. So they're all a matched set, 16 on the bottom and 16 on the top. The question is, why do we have 2 sets of teeth? Why do we have 2 sets of teeth? And the answer is because the jaw of a child is not big enough to contain, to house all of these adult teeth. We have to wait until the child's head grows, the skull grows, the jaw grows to accommodate all these teeth. And meanwhile, until the child is pretty close to adult-sized jaw, the child in human evolution is chewing and eating things, right? They're not simply having milk. That probably ended by about age 2, although we actually don't know how long people normally would nurse. Nursing and milk is not considered traditionally to have been the only source after age 1. Most nursing is replaced and supplemented by food, and so then there's a long transition period, perhaps the 2nd year of life. So from 1 to 2 years old, a little baby might have normally been nursing and eating hard foods that would be associated with these teeth. Tooth structure. I'm going to go into a little detail here. Anybody that might be interested in dentistry or any aspects, a dental hygienist who make, by the way, an awful lot of money. This is some of the anatomy that you simply must know, and this is just such an outstanding figure. couple things to note real quick. They're calling this bone alveolar bone because it's associated with the alveolus, which is where these roots of these teeth are coming in. That's still the dentary bone. The whole bone is the dentary bone. This is a region. So they call it alveolar bone, but it's the region of the jaw. Okay. So we have the crown at the very, very top. Here you can see that labeled. That's going to include the enamel, we'll get to in a second, and then we have the root. So crown, neck, right at the gum surface, and then the roots down here. Here these things are all defined for you nicely on the screen, and so you can pause if you want to. Cleaning this gingival sulcus is so important, and if you use those vibrating toothbrushes, you use them lightly on the surface. There's no need at all to push them down, so you have a very light hold, and those vibrating bristles can get right in here and do a good job cleaning and keep this healthy as can be. And all I'm going to tell you is an awful lot of people who are old wish they had taken better care of their teeth when they were your age and even younger. So what is the alveolus? That's the tooth socket, and that's what I said. So the alveolar bone is the bone of the mandible that's associated with the tooth sockets. You can see this gomphosis joint is between then the roots of the tooth and that bone there, the socket. Periodontal ligament, also identified here, is really helping to hold the tooth in place. As you can see, there are fibers there. It anchors it, allows for a little bit of movement of your teeth, so that's good. And by the way, it answers one of the questions. If you've had any work done on your teeth, if you had braces added or anything, the teeth are, or even that you get something between your teeth that's really uncomfortable, the tooth will adjust. The tooth will eventually shift a little bit, and it'll be less uncomfortable. It'd be better if you removed what's between your teeth, and I hope you know what is the recommended way to remove material between your teeth. It's not brushing, it's flossing. Flossing is this mechanical string, of course, that's pulled between the teeth. You try to floss and not hit the gum, hit this, and irritate that region. So you're trying to floss that very tough string right in between the teeth and remove anything that got lodged between there. So there's the gum, the gingiva. So, dentin. Here you can see this large area of dentin, this yellowish kind of tissue that makes up most of the tooth. And here you can see the enamel. The enamel is this non-cellular, really hard material. It's probably the hardest material in your body. The exception might be if you swallowed a diamond. And then you'd have to argue with me whether or not that diamond, undigested, ever entered your body, right? We had that conversation in the first video. Okay, enamel's the hard stuff in the body, all right? Cementum, you can see down here, is what's material that's helping to bind the root into the socket. And it's the cementum and dentum that are both alive and can regenerate. And so that's good news. If a tooth came out of its socket, if you had a tooth that was knocked loose and you wrapped it, kept it moist, don't freeze it, but maybe put it in a refrigerator if you need a couple hours to get to a dentist, and they may be able to put a tooth back in its socket and it would make it. Okay, so that's quite possible. If a tooth got knocked loose, it could be put back in. Something to bear in mind. You might want to talk to your dentist the next time you're there, because we never plan on accidents, right? You might want to talk to your dentist and say, what would you suggest if I had a tooth knocked loose? How could I protect it to get back and to be able to put it possibly back in place and have a chance that it could survive? A chance. I'm not saying it will. Okay. So what is the root canal? Well, it's right here. It's labeled. It's that very deep core of the roots of the tooth where blood vessels and nerves run. You can see all of that connecting at the very, very bottom. That would have to reconnect if you're putting a tooth back in the socket. And that I don't know. I don't know if the nerves could ever reconnect up and and the tips of the nerves could regrow. I don't know that. Also, the blood vessels would have to regrow. So that's something to talk to a dentist about. Find out about their success putting teeth back in. The very, very tip of a tooth is a hole. That's the apical foramen, and that's allowing these blood vessels and nerves to enter the root of the tooth. So this is all form and function stuff, right? You could put an FS next to that because that's an important function, the apical foramen of a tooth. What's it do? And it allows the passage of blood vessels and nerves into the core of a tooth. Another term associated with dentistry, and you might even hear your dentist talk about it if you're having some work done, an occlusion or occlusion is simply where the teeth meet. And we hope that when your teeth come together, they meet properly. And by the way, if you have some work or changes done in your teeth, we've already talked about the fact that this living area right here can adjust, it's possible. The shape of the tooth will change. And actually, when you have some work done on below, the teeth will actually adjust a little bit to make sure, to ensure a better occlusion, a better seal. Okay? And now that we've just gone over all these parts, what I want to demonstrate to you right here in this figure is exactly what you can do to study. You could make up a PowerPoint. You could do this in so many different ways. There might be a Quizlet or something where you take an image like this and you place labels on top that you can remove them one at a time, and you can see if you can remember what these things are. So what is number 1 labeling right here? What is this? And there's the answer. That's the enamel. What's number 2 labeling right here? Well, I hope you remember that this is dentin. Okay? And on and on and on. So I'm showing you this. You could slow it down, and you could quiz yourself here, but I suggest that you make these for yourself. All right, what happens when things go wrong? What are the things that could happen? First of all, we have all sorts of bacteria living in our mouth, and we want them living in our mouth. We want these bacteria to help fight off other bacteria that we don't want in our mouth. So it's one of those things you got to realize, the microbiome, all of these bacteria living throughout our digestive tract, also the ones that live on the surface of our skin and on all kinds of cavities, there's a normal resident population of healthy bacteria. And we want those there. We would not want to wipe all those out. Okay? Plaque is a dental film. It's a biofilm. So I don't have this word on the screen, but biofilm is a sheet, a very sticky sheet of bacteria that grows on surfaces. And biofilms can be particularly hard to remove, difficult to remove. So one of those toothbrushes, like these ones that vibrate, the ultrasonic ones that I like and recommend, will help to remove these biofilms that are on the surface. Well, those biofilms can secrete a calcified plaque. It's called calculus, and some of you already are frightened by calculus. Well, that's a math class. In this case, we're talking about something that builds up on your teeth. Some of those bacteria, as you can see, are eating. They're metabolizing sugars and releasing acids, and those acids are going to help dissolve the enamel and dentin, and that leads to cavities that are formerly called dental caries. Okay, that's the term that's used in dentistry. Gingivitis is a disease that, as you would guess, you got a gingiva, and so gingivitis is an inflammation of the gums. Periodontal disease is then destruction of that joint where the teeth are sitting, and that's really bad because then the teeth come out and you lose your teeth forever. If the pulp of the tooth is injured in some way or the tooth dies in some way, then a root canal is likely required, and they're going to drill in there and they're going to probably fill up that cavity because otherwise it would be rotting and you could potentially lose the tooth. Okay. New subject, and this is chewing. Mastication, not to be confused with another word that doesn't have anything to do with this, but it sounds like it. So chewing, we've already talked over and over and over. We're breaking the food down into smaller pieces so you can swallow them, and then 2 functions: swallow them small enough to swallow, and increased surface area for interactions with fluids, including digestive enzymes. So we've really talked about this already, and we've already gone through and looked at all of these kinds of muscles, at least in human anat and phys 1. Here's a good look at these isolated muscles here in a lateral view of a cadaver. These are lateral views without anything that's removed, but right here they've removed then the arch, the zygomatic arch that's right here, so that you can see the extent of the temporalis muscle from the side of your head down all the way onto the jaw. Okay, that's the coronoid process of the mandible, and this is the condyloid process, and that's the dentary bone right there. So here you can see these muscles that are involved in moving and chewing. The temporalis and masseter are the big ones for biting down. These pterygoids are important for side-to-side movement of the jaw. This as you wiggle your jaw side to side. When people are stressed, they might clench their jaw. And if you're talking to someone and they're getting excited, they're not happy with you, but they're not speaking, if they're clenching their jaw, you might see these flare. You might see these bulge out. And that's a time to back up. It's a time to stop doing whatever you're doing and back up, because the person's building up their tension right here. Likewise, since some people are sleeping, they have a lot of tension, and they do this, and they also have the lateral movement, and that whole area can be sore in the morning, and this is a very important thing to get attended to, because this will degrade your teeth. So people can mechanically chew like that at night, grinding their teeth together, and that hurts the surfaces of your teeth. It hurts the enamel and can cause serious problems. Also hurt the temporomandibular joint right here. So you want to see a dentist, and one thing that they can do is give you a mouth guard, just like somebody would have for a sport. And so you can get those. Most of you know or have played sports. Many of you have had mouth guards. You can get them where, you soften them up. I think it's boiling them mostly. Then you put them in your mouth, hopefully while they're not boiling hot, and you can shape them to the specific contours of your head. Yes, it's annoying, but if you have this problem, guys, you have to avoid grinding your teeth. That simply is going to destroy your teeth. All right, the last big section here for us to talk about is the salivary glands, right? Making saliva. Lots of functions of saliva. So what I'd like you to do is see if you can come up with 3 all by yourself. This is where you can pause the video and see if you can come up with some of the functions of saliva. Well, first, think about chewing. So you've chewed food up like a pretzel. You've chewed it up into lots of little dry pieces. What's saliva going to do? It's going to bind those pieces together into a spitty ball that you can swallow. And second, it's going to lubricate that spitty ball so it can make its way down your throat. So there's 2 functions. Keeps the mouth moist. Remember that this is a non-keratinized area, so it's very much prone to losing moisture. Maybe you've woken up at night because you had your mouth open and the inside of your mouth is really, really dry. If it's a chronic problem, it's something that you ought to address with your dentist. There might be something that can be done. There are even devices, gentle devices, that keep your jaw shut when you sleep. So if your mouth dries up at night, it actually can lead to dental problems. It is the very beginning of starch and fat digestion that I mentioned. It cleans the teeth, so it's good to have saliva all over your teeth at the end of a meal. I sometimes chew gum after the end of a meal. Now, this is sugarless gum, and that actually promotes extra saliva bathing my teeth, and it's a healthy thing to do. It would be good to brush your teeth after a meal, but short of that, chewing gum can be helpful. Some of the saliva inhibits bacterial growth. Some of the dissolved molecules, if you go back and remember what we talked about at the end of human anat and phys 1, was that you have to dissolve what you brought into your mouth, like dissolving salt It's that dissolved salt that is actually detected. And then here's the first couple things that I was telling you about. It moistens food, binds it together, and lubricates it for swallowing. Okay? The spitty ball that you would be swallowing, if it was pretzel, for example, that's called a bolus. It's a single unit of what you're swallowing is a bolus. So those are the 6 functions I think that your book lists for saliva. As I look this over, I don't really see the lubrication of the bolus, and I definitely would add that to the list. So what is saliva? And page 953 lists all this, so you might as well just get right to it. You can find this on page 953. Mostly water, of course, close to a neutral pH. Here's an enzyme that's starting starch digestion. Here's an enzyme that's starting a little bit of fat digestion. Lingual. So what part of the body is lingual? And that's your tongue. That's your tongue, guys. Linguistics is languages, I think. And so it's based as well on that word root. Here's the mucus that's lubricating the mass of food. That's a role that they actually didn't list on that list before. A lysozyme is an enzyme killing some bacteria. There's even antibodies that you'll find in saliva. And of course, all sorts of electrolytes that are listed here. How about the salivary glands? Well, salivary glands, the ones that you probably know about, are the extrinsic salivary glands. And this word is intrinsic. Intrinsic means they're within the tissues. So they could be within your cheeks, for example. Extrinsic glands are the ones that are around the sides of your mouth. So around your cheeks and underneath your chin. So intrinsics are in the tongue. And these produce this lingual lipase that's helping to break down fats. Also, they're inside glands that are in the lips themselves and in the roof of the mouth in the palatine glands. Here's some in your cheeks. And they're all releasing on a pretty regular basis. That's the point. Intrinsic, so this is an important point for you to get down. Intrinsic are pretty much always on. They're always on, and they're always embedded in the surrounding tissues of the oral cavity. And that would be the cheeks and lips, tongue, roof of the mouth, etc. So these are the extrinsic. These are the ones on the outside of your body. And these are more stimulated by thinking about those nacho chips, or if you're hungry right now, having something, I hope, really, really good to eat. Something healthy. I hope it's mostly fruits and vegetables, which is not only better for you, but better for the environment. Meat is such it's a polluting, if you want to think about it that way, kind of nutrition. Making meat is a very inefficient use of grains, and it produces all sorts of toxic waste that enter our waterways, the urine and feces of whatever it is, whether it's chicken or pigs or beef, mostly what people eat. So when you're eating some kind of food, you're going to produce a lot of saliva. And I don't know if you've really considered this. So one of the questions that I've asked you actually in my zoology class was, what unit of measure is equal to a liter of a fluid? So is it a cup, a pint, a quart, or a gallon? 1 liter is just about equal to 1 cup, 1 pint, 1 quart, or 1 gallon. What do you think? And the answer is quart. Holy cow, a quart. Right here, 1.5 liters. So you know what 2-liter bottles look like. And I'm going to guess most of you don't sit down and drink an entire 2-liter bottle of whatever's in that 2-liter bottle. Well, imagine half of that bottle is just spit a day. Up to 1.5. So 3/4 of a 2-liter bottle. Wow, that's a lot of spit each day. There are 3 main extrinsic salivary glands that are connected by ducts, long ducts sometimes, to the oral cavity. Parotid gland is the one that's back by your ears, on your cheeks. When you have mumps, it's an inflammation of that particular gland. Submandibular is underneath the chin. I'm going to show you a picture of these in just a second. So this is emptying underneath the tongue, and we talked about that. I showed you that when we did the initial quiz here in this second lecture. And sublingual is just that. It's underneath the tongue. It has a number of ducts that empty in these places. So here we see in a person who's maybe trying to catch a baseball or they've just kicked a soccer ball and they're seeing it fly in the air. So they're looking up. Or they're inspired. They're watching clouds. I always look at this picture and wonder what the person's looking at. Now, mostly they posed the picture so that you could see what's underneath the person's tongue in a cutaway view like this. Okay, so they're really not looking at anything. Here's that parotid gland. Here's submandibular, and here's sublingual underneath the tongue. You can feel two of these then gently pressing here on the parotid gland just in front of your ear. You might actually feel extra saliva come into your mouth. Here, submandibular pressing underneath your chin might have the same effect, and you can feel your tongue. I can feel it while I'm talking, moving around, and then of course sublingual right here. Things that I had already mentioned to you. Figure 25.9 in your textbook. Here, taking a look on a cadaver and with the cheek cut away so that you can see these glands. Now, these are the kind of dissections that you might be doing if you go to medical school, or in other programs you'll probably see these cadavers already dissected. So in many programs you see the cadavers and you study the cadavers, but you don't do the dissection yourself. In some places they sort of migrate their different programs all into the same labs. So I'm already aware that in some schools, the med school cadavers are also used by the physical therapy or occupational therapy students, physician's assistant students, for example. And so you'd be looking at something like this. And here you can clearly see those glands. So sublingual is inside the area of the oral cavity between the teeth. And we can see it here under the tongue. This one you can palpate under your chin, and this on the side in front of your ear. There's the ear. And now we're going to end by talking about the histology of salivary glands. Okay, so they have branched ducts typically. So we call these compound glands. The acini, so here's an acinus right here, is the end of a gland, and it's the secretory unit. And you can see serous means that it's a watery secretion. Mucus means that it's a thicker, mucousy, like you know mucus, secretion here. So there you go. In writing, there's the distinction between those two types of secretory cells. These are secretory cells. They're secreting something, right? And in some cases, that you have the segregation, the separation of the mucous cells from the serous. And in other cases, here's the serous alone here. And then, mucus right here I'm pointing out. And down here, serous I'm pointing out. And then here what you see is both mixture of serous and mucus. So there's a mixed acinus right here, and here this is all really, really well mixed together with serous and mucus. And now a few important things to tell you about that. Okay. First of all, we have these two words, and you see mucus and you might wonder, well, how do I spell mucus? These are different words and they mean different things. This is the thick stuff. This is the noun. This is the noun. This is the thick stuff that's in your nose and that's being secreted into your mouth. This is an adjective. So a type of secretion that is very thick is a mucus secretion. We call such a secretion mucus. So mucus is an adjective, mucus is a noun. Okay, it is talking about the same thing, but are we talking about the stuff or something that's like the stuff? So I said they have branched ducts. We've already talked about this and the different types of cells. Now, over here in this blue box, something that I don't think is in your textbook, but something I learned in histology. So here you're looking at a salivary gland that has mucus and serous cells. How do you tell them? Well, you look at the labels. No. How would you tell it if you're looking under the microscope? How could you distinguish between serous and mucus secretory cells? And one of the answers is some of the staining is different. So if you look here, it's darker under this stain for the serous cells, and the mucus cells are lighter in color. That's true. And if you remember your cell biology, one of the things you can use that really stains up the mucus cells is the PAS reaction. You actually might have used it and stained up some mucus secreting cells of the small intestine. And they're bright pink. Okay, so one way you can distinguish is by using the right kinds of stains or histochemical reactions. So those are chemical reactions that give you a different color. So we're looking at these secretory units. By the way, that's different than the duct here. This is a duct with a very distinct lumen. And here we have probably columnar cells that are very, very nice. So this is the duct. This is over here the secretory units. And what's important is remember that this is an excretory gland. So we have endocrine and exocrine glands. Exocrine is what I should have said. An exocrine gland, because exocrine glands have ducts. Endocrine glands do not. Okay? So this is an exocrine gland. Another clue is that mucus is so thick when it accumulates in the cells that the nuclei of mucus cells tends to be flattened near the bottom of the secretory cells, whereas in serous, they're rounded. So look at these nuclei here, quite rounded and sort of in the middle of the cell. But here, this thick stuff, mucus, pushes the nuclei towards the bottom of the cell and flattens them a little bit. So even if you don't have the color distinction, that's one way that we distinguish between serous and mucus cells. And that's, again, if you go to medical school or a veterinary program, this is literally something that you might have in the very first month of those programs. Okay. So this is not a picture from Saladin. Here we're seeing the lighter staining mucus cells and the darker staining serous cells. And I don't think those are labeled right here. And I want to talk about how we control the release of these products. So these are extrinsic glands, we said. These are glands that are on the outside of your face, although one of the extrinsic glands is under your tongue. And I said the intrinsic glands are sort of always on. It's like a night light, right? It's always on. Although actually night lights do turn off during the day, so maybe that wasn't a good example. It's something that's always on. Okay, that's not these. These extrinsic glands are regulated. And sometimes, like when you're eating a meal, a lot of saliva is released while you're chewing and then swallowing. So the question is, what controls that? And right here, they're not easily seen, but in other ways you could spot them if you were in doing histology. But in this location are big flat cells called myoepithelial cells. Yes, you need to know this. And myoepithelial cells, in my analogy, are like this hand squeezing an orange. These cells stretch out. Now, they don't completely go around an orange like this, but they stretch out around the secretory part of these extrinsic salivary glands, and they contract when we need to release a product. And they squeeze out the secretions into the ducts and through the ducts. And so your saliva can be flooding your mouth. Well, if that happens suddenly, maybe you want to eat this orange or something very sour, and you suddenly are stimulated to release saliva, these myoepithelial cells can squeeze down so hard that they can cause spit to shoot out underneath your tongue. And I promised you at the beginning of this lecture that I would give you the explanation for gleeking. Now, that's not a formal name, but that forceful expulsion expulsion of saliva from your salivary glands and out the duct and out underneath your tongue is caused by myoepithelial cells quickly and strongly contracting. Okay? Now, a couple other really cool bonuses here as we end this. In a spitting cobra who can shoot their venom many meters away, in some cases aiming for your eyes. So Dr. Cardong, my mentor, he had a spitting cobra, a live one, and it was right near my office within about 20 feet. And when he would go in to feed it, he had to wear goggles because he'd open the cage, the thing would spit this venom into his goggles, and if it got in his eyes, it could blind him or certainly hurt his eyes. So this forceful expulsion of saliva or venom from a venomous snake is caused by these myoepithelial cells. But there's another really important place where we have myoepithelial cells, in another extrinsic gland not associated with the mouth. And that extrinsic gland are mammary glands. And when a woman is feeding a baby, she is stimulated either by the suckling little infant or by the sound of a baby's cry. And that stimulates these myoepithelial cells in the mammary glands to release milk. And we call that milk letdown. Milk letdown, so a woman who's breastfeeding, I don't know if you've thought this through, and if you're a woman that hasn't much experience with this, that is, you don't know anybody that's breastfed or haven't breastfed yourself, and guys, most of us would have to work at it to learn these kinds of details because we're not breastfeeding little babies. But during breastfeeding, when a woman is breastfeeding a child for many, many months, she's not regularly just always leaking milk. Okay? Don't know if you thought about that. But it is something that is episodic, we say. It's something that doesn't occur all the time. And the milk letdown, of course, needs to happen when the baby suckles. So these myoepithelial cells, I keep tracing here, are what actually contract and squeeze. And women can feel a tightness within their breasts when this happens, just like I can feel a tightness in my salivary glands when I eat something very, very sour. Because it's, again, this tightness created by these myoepithelial cells. Isn't that neat? Yeah. I had a woman once ask me, she had been breastfeeding and stopped, recently had stopped, and she told me that she was in a restaurant and she heard a baby crying and it made her breasts hurt. That's what the lady said. And she wanted to know, could I explain that? And I said, oh yeah, I think I know exactly what's going on. She stopped breastfeeding, but she was still having the myoepithelial cells contracting when she heard the stimulus. So the stimulus of a baby crying caused her cells to contract, but there wasn't milk in the units. So she just experienced the tightness in her breasts without having milk being released. All right. I'm not sure that all the lectures are going to be this interesting, but I hope that you have enjoyed this. And we are done with the second recorded lecture.